Marhaba, Shalom, and welcome to the exciting new podcast Israel and Palestine Unpacked that is dedicated to exploring the complexities of the ongoing political situation between Palestinians and Israelis. Throughout the course of this podcast, it is my hope that we can delve into the historical and contemporary events and ideas that have shaped the course of this long-standing geopolitical and humanitarian crisis, as well as explore the ongoing and unresolved issues, while remembering the human cost, experience, and perspective. The situation has been brought into sharp focus nationally and internationally by recent events that have dominated our screens as well as our thoughts. The aim here is to be sensitive, as I understand that emotions are easily triggered. It is important to note that the topic will be approached from an academic position to unpack and understand the issues, and that all views expressed will be and are the views of the interviewees alone. Before we go into today's episode, it's important for me to give special thanks to Mike, a professional audio producer from Media Mihael, for composing the intro and outro music for this podcast, to Colin McAlinden for help with editing and his professional wisdom, to Ricky at Login Studio for designing the logo, and finally to friends and family for their feedback. In today's episode, we're joined by Nicole Janse-Sion, an American journalist who has been living in Jerusalem for the past 2 decades. Nicole offers a unique perspective on how the city has evolved over the years, from shifts in its physical landscape to changes in its political and social fabric. She also delves into the day-to-day realities of living in a city that remains at the heart of complex geopolitical tensions. Through her experiences, we gain a deeper understanding of how Jerusalem's contested nature affects the lives of its residents, and the way history, religion, and politics intersect in this deeply significant city. I do hope that you find this episode of Israel and Palestine Unpacked informative, and if you would like to receive more content, you are welcome to subscribe and join us as we journey to gain insightful perspectives and knowledge. If you have any comments, questions or feedback, please feel free to contact me at Israel-Palestine-Unpacked, all one word, at gmail.com, or alternatively, you can connect via our Facebook page or X account, formerly known as Twitter. All contact information can be found below in the description. Our interview today is with Nicole, who lives in Jerusalem, where she is reporting on the complicated yet beautiful aspects of this city, as well as the challenges facing the people of the Holy Land. She and her husband Tony are raising 3 children in a crossroads of languages, cultures, and religions. If you'd like to dive deeper into Nicole's journalistic work, be sure to check out the links to her YouTube channel and website in the episode description below. There, you'll find more of her insights and reflections on life in Jerusalem, as well as her ongoing projects. Whether you're interested in daily goings-on, her in-depth analyses, or simply want to follow her latest updates, her platforms offer a wealth of valuable content. We join the discussion with Nicole sharing about how the city of Jerusalem has changed over the past 20 years.
Well, it's so interesting how it's changed in various ways. I mean, first of all, I would say that anybody who was here 20 years ago wouldn't necessarily know how to get around the same way. There's just a lot of development. There's a lot of building going on. There's construction everywhere. There's a new, they're trying to put a train in, if you can imagine, like this is the most ancient city, and they're trying to put a train through. But also at the same time, the city is getting more religious in a few ways, especially Jewish. When I say religious, I mean that the Jewish population of religious Jews is growing, and secular Jews are slowly leaving the city. So in that sense, Jerusalem is also changing demographically. Okay, so you would see places that were normally open on the Jewish Sabbath are getting closed, and now they're closed, or they're changing into different ownership. They're becoming kosher. So it feels like for a lot of secular Jewish residents of the city, they feel like they're getting squeezed out. So that's one way that I see it changing. And also you see a little bit of like with the Christian communities, you do see a maybe a minor shrinking. I don't have numbers, but the Christian communities are also getting more concentrated into, where they exist, where they live already. And it seems like the walls are closing in on them as well.
So you mentioned about Jews, Christians, and then again, by extension, we could talk about Muslims as well. Jerusalem has always been a contested space. If anyone with a keen eye for history will see that, and they will see how through the establishment or the building of various mausoleums of dead religious saints, as well as buildings such as churches and mosques and synagogues to celebrate a particular religious presence in a city. How have you seen this narrative, this contested space change or play out over your experience of living in the city, whether it be within the new city, in Arab East Jerusalem, or within the old city?
Well, Jerusalem it's not just the people, but it's also the times that we have to understand. I think it's something that when you live in the West, you generally have one religion that dictates the calendar, the holidays that you have where you live. And here in Jerusalem, first of all, it's part of Israel, which is the Jewish state. So you have the Jewish holidays. So everything is affected by the Jewish holidays. But then, for instance, in this spring, 2024, we had three religious holidays, or the holidays of three religions, converging in just the space of 3 months. So then what you see is not just a convergence of people, but a convergence of people in a specific time, all coming to the Old City. So the Old City is the Mecca, if you will, for three monotheistic religions. For the Jews, there's the Western Wall. For the Muslims, there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the compound that includes the Dome of the Rock. Now, for the Christians, there are, despite being a really small minority in the country, like about 2% of Israelis are Christian, and only 1% of Palestinians are Christian. And the Palestinians even, get permits, or they try to get permits to come to Jerusalem to worship on their holidays. But of the Christians, there are several denominations, and among these probably a dozen or so denominations, some follow the Catholic and Protestant calendar, and others follow the Orthodox calendar. So what you see is, Easter will have 2 different dates usually. And then most of the time that somehow coincides with one of the Jewish holidays, with Passover. But there are times also that, because the Muslim calendar moves throughout the year, it's, not exactly a 12-month calendar like we have. So you will see the holidays shift by a couple weeks every year. So you have religion, everybody, the faithful from each religion coming to worship at, in Jerusalem at one of their sites, all at the same time. And it's already a tent city, but when you're coming for religious purpose, when you feel like you're also being contested, like for instance, if there are limits that the Israeli police will put on the number of worshipers who can go to the mosque, or the number of people who can enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, then you tend to have also an explosion. Violent reaction sometimes, and of course, protests in the media and the churches, or the Muslim leaders, complaining in advance, to the police, and trying to you'll see it play out in the media. So that's sort of what happens around the holidays, and that gives you a sense of how the religions are so connected to this city. And also, while I would say, having grown up in the West, you may not necessarily be able to tell who is Jewish, who's Christian, who's Muslim, because for, a secular person, you could all look the same. But here in Jerusalem, for the most part who is who. The Christians very proudly wear crosses. Most of the Jews here, majority of the population is religious, and also with the Muslims. So you see the division right in front of you, as when you're walking through the crowds and you see the people, you're able to tell who's who. So there's you can feel it in the city, and also based on where people live. There's the Christian quarter, there's the Armenian quarter, they're also Christian, the Jewish quarter, and then the Muslim quarter. Of course, also most Jews in the city live in West Jerusalem, and most Arabs, Christians and Muslim, live in East Jerusalem. So there's also the division based on neighborhood.
It's interesting when I read about history. I love history. Religious festivals often were opportunities in history, and I'm sure today as well, as we see often on the news, for people to congregate together to air their grievances, their political grievances around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and other localized matters. Can you give some examples in recent days of where that religious and political tension, is it right to say, have synthesized as such in a communal sense and have expressed themselves?
Have expressed themselves for the good or the bad?
Well, you tell me. But obviously, there are many examples of goods. There are many examples of communities coming together and worshiping and being together
Yes.
in a sense and express themselves politically. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's interesting because the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, the negative and the charged. But of always, every Ramadan, there is an expectation that there will be violence. Now, this Ramadan, this year in 2024, was to the backdrop of a major war. Israel is in Gaza. There are, tens of thousands of people dead in Gaza. And of course, this all stems from the October 7th attacks by Hamas, which invaded Israel, and 1,200 Israelis were killed on that day. So this is still a season of war that we're talking about. And then Ramadan. Now, Hamas actually called their operation Al-Aqsa Flood. And Al-Aqsa being in Jerusalem, Hamas being based in Gaza, which is about 60 miles south. So I had always wondered if their intention was actually, when they broke through the fence, if they intended to come all the way to Al-Aqsa, to Jerusalem. And though they did not, then the question was, when Ramadan came around, was this going to be the focus for Hamas? And Hamas did try to rally local Muslims to be a part of, to resist Israel, to resist the Israeli restrictions on worshipers. And there was, of course, this brought up in the government, in the Israeli government, to what level should worshipers be restricted? And some who are very much part of the right-wing part of the government said that there should be very heavy restrictions, and then others advocated for fewer. In the end, there were very few restrictions, and this may have been one of the quietest Ramadans that I've ever experienced here since I moved here. So that was very interesting. But on the other hand, and for a positive look at how what happens with the religions, there are land issues when particularly there are Jewish groups, organizations that buy property, and it's sort of a de facto reclamation of the land. Like if they buy property from a non-Jewish entity, then it becomes Jewish land. And of course, land is the hottest topic here in all of the Holy Land, particularly in Jerusalem. So recently, there was a report of a property deal in the Armenian quarter where a large chunk of the Armenian quarter is being sold. The deal is still ongoing. It's in court now, but it was sold to a developer who is Jewish. And we don't know for sure if there is a settler organization behind this deal. But in any case, it would basically mean the end of the Armenian community here in a couple years. I mean, they would lose the ability to park in the old city where they park now, which and it serves the about 1,000 residents, maybe fewer, but that live in the old city there, or that bring their kids to school in the old city. And eventually you would see a fading away of the population here. Now, some of the biggest advocates are actually Jewish Israelis who have come to the protests and are standing with the Armenians and saying they cannot lose their property, their identity, and their presence here in the Holy Land. Of course, it's also become a Palestinian issue, and there are Palestinians who are using this, saying that this is Israel's way of taking over and creating a de facto final status agreement of the old city. Before in Camp David, one of the reasons Camp David failed was over the Armenian quarter. Was the Armenian quarter going to be part of Israel, or was it going to be part of a Palestinian state? And it was never discussed. Both sides wanted it, of course, but the Israelis want it because it's access to the Western Wall coming from West Jerusalem, where most of the Israeli Jews live. They would be going to the Western Wall. And of course, the Palestinians wanted it for several reasons. One, because it's more property, but also because Armenians aren't Jewish, and there are Armenians that live in the West Bank as well, and so they wanted it as well. So there are the Palestinians say that this is an Israeli attempt to make the final status right there without actually negotiating. So this is one of those charged issues that have brought people from both sides to actually advocate for the third party, for the Armenians.
I'm curious to know the role of the Israeli government, if any, in all of this. In 2022, though, the most right-wing Israeli government was elected to the Knesset, a government that is led by Benjamin Netanyahu of the Likud party. What role has Netanyahu's government played in exacerbating tensions in the city, in your opinion?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, while I cannot, especially as a journalist, I can't sit here and say that it is directly caused by this government. I will say that the spike in particularly anti-Christian acts of violence and vandalism occurred in the beginning of 2023. So the government was finally inaugurated in December of 2022, that Netanyahu's government. But beginning in January 2023, there was a series of violent acts, particularly in the Old City, particularly against Christians. And it was actually the Armenians who bore the brunt of it because of it's the passageway to the Western Wall. So it is where a lot of Jews would walk to get to the Western Wall. Now, what was interesting, though, about this, normally there are scuffles. This is kind of historic and known, and this has been going on for years, predating this government. There was always tension between Orthodox, very obviously Orthodox Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, and Christian clergy, because they look Christian, whereas a regular Christian may not necessarily, he's just dressed in regular clothes. So, but it was always between the ultra Orthodox and the clergy, and spitting was the main thing, that the Jews would spit at them or spit in front of a church. But what was interesting about this particular wave of violence is that it wasn't the ultra Orthodox Jews. It was the national religious Jews that were involved in the acts of violence. And it was not just spitting; it was vandalizing and graffiti, and violence as well, like actually pepper spray and fights, there were a couple of brawls. It started, I believe, with the Anglican cemetery when and you see they're seen on video, and they're the National Religious, which is not ultra Orthodox, but they're closely associated with two of the parties that are propping up Netanyahu's government, which is one is called Jewish Power, and the other one is called Religious Zionism. And so they are, and they have there's a look, they wear a certain color kippah, and they have their, hair the same way, they wear specific clothes, which is different from the ultra-Orthodox. So it's how you could tell them apart. So in this particular surveillance video, they were vandalizing the graves, like from the 1800s, historic graves of Christians that had been in the land. And then also there were attacks on Christian establishments like restaurants. And there was another attack in a church. And ultimately there was actually scrawled on the wall by the Armenian quarter, "Death to Arabs, death to Armenians, death to Christians." So it's taken a different turn. Now, this was going on for, I would say, the first half of last year. Maybe it faded a little bit in its intensity over the summer. And then we had October 7th. So since then, that's about all we've heard of. There hasn't been much since then.
This question's a bit more impromptu. If you could make an appeal to people in the West, particularly Christians, who are called to be peacemakers, what would you say to them?
Great question. You have such an important role as a Christian, as a peacemaker. And I would say that whatever you've learned and grown up with, pause and open your mind and open your spirit and listen to the people on the ground, understand them, and understand all of the issues in context. It's very difficult. It's very complicated here. I know that. But I would say to gain understanding about the people here on the ground and the situations, and not limited to maybe what you've previously learned or heard.
As we wrap up today's episode, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Nicole for sharing her experiences and reflections. Conversations like these offer us deeper insights into the political and personal dynamics of the land. Nicole's account of how Jerusalem has changed over the past 20 years provides a crucial perspective on the city as a contested space, helping us better understand its complexities and the ongoing transformations that shape it. In our next episode, we will be interviewing both an Israeli and a Palestinian who have lived in Northern Ireland for over the past 20 years. Until then, what's left to say is thank you for joining us, and if you have any feedback or comments, please feel free to share your perspectives by getting in touch via email at Israel-Palestine Unpacked, all one word, @gmail.com, or alternatively via our Facebook page. All contact information can be found below in the description. I hope that you'll join me next time on Israel and Palestine Unpacked.